Good evening. Checking the sound. Everyone can hear me okay? Good evening and an incredibly warm welcome to this evening's event, which is all part of Festival of Nature 2024. My name is Savita Wilmot. I'm the director of the Natural History Consortium, which is the charity that produces the festival each year. It's our 21st birthday. We're on day 5 of 9, so if you're just joining Festival of Nature now, there's plenty more to do. The Natural History Consortium is a partnership of 14 organisations who, for the last 20 years, have collaborated on initiatives and programmes for public and sector audiences, connecting people and nature. So tonight is a really special event in our festival calendar because it brings together two of our partners, the University of West of England and BBC. Before we start, a couple of housekeeping points. Most importantly, we're not expecting a fire alarm, so if there is a fire alarm, do follow the staff here. I think equally importantly, there's a drinks reception afterwards. We'd love you to join us to continue the conversations, meet the speakers, come and ask me about Festival of Nature. That's down at the room at the very end of the kind of hallway down there by the water. So it's my real pleasure to introduce our speaker and our chair this evening. I think you'll be hearing from Danielle Mulder from the BBC. Danielle is BBC Group's Director of Sustainability. She was awarded UK Green Business Leader of the Year last year in 2023 and has spearheaded the BBC's Nature Positive strategy, which you'll be hearing all about this evening. Chairing our discussion with Danielle and with all of you, plenty of opportunity for discussion and questions from the audience tonight, is Professor Georgina Goff. Professor Goff is one of only 3 professors of education for sustainable development in the UK and a founding member of the Sustainable Development Goals Alliance. She's also a leader for UWI's MSc in Sustainable Development in Practice. So it's definitely something to ask Georgina about afterwards over a drink. Thank you so much for coming, and I will hand over to Danielle.
Good evening. Well, thanks very much for having me. It's great to come to Bristol on this World Environment Day is today. So I feel very privileged and I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you all tonight about nature positivity, what it means for the BBC, what we've been up to at the BBC. I noticed a few of you got drinks, have already got started, so I'm looking forward to a sort of garrulous crowd asking difficult questions. We're up for it. But yeah, I think the exam question tonight was about nature positive, and I'm going to outline our overarching sort of strategy, but particularly this question around nature and nature positivity given the Festival of Nature and what that means for an organisation, for the BBC. And I'm going to try and make it as real as I can, because it's a concept and it's out there, but I want to try and bring it into, real day life for, myself and the team and what it means for the BBC and why it matters for a big organisation with a reputation on the line, particularly on nature. So, coming into this, there we go. Maybe the clicker will work. Oh, here we go. Thank you. It is working. So these are what we call our 3 pillars of our sustainability strategy. We are net zero, nature positive, and people positive. But as I said, we're going to focus today on nature positive as the topic of the day, and I will touch on the other areas as well. Got a little bit of a lag going on, I don't know why. So as you can see, the 3 pillars of our sustainability strategy, and I'll outline what they are. I think everybody knows about net zero. That's fundamentally our carbon position and how we're going to achieve net zero as an organisation at the BBC. The nature positive I'm obviously going to talk about with you today and how that's taking shape. And the people positive bit is very important to us because of who we are, the world's biggest public broadcaster. central to our purpose and the impact of our programming, particularly the impact of our programming on the environmental and wildlife programming that I know is absolutely core to the heart of Bristol and this community here. So we have what we call a value for all strategy at the BBC. Clearly the BBC is under pressure. We've got a streaming market, you know, that has blown up, particularly during COVID, and we're under attack from different parts of the globe, but also our commercial model and how we're financed is under pressure as well. So we've got this value for all strategy that we've recently launched. Tim Davey launched it recently, and we have 3 priorities that have been reset at the BBC, and they're important to sustainability, which is why I wanted to touch on them. Pursue the truth with no agenda. It's absolutely core to the BBC, who we are, and fundamental to our purpose as an organisation, being impartial, and also the importance of the free press. Not many countries, I believe, do have a free press. We're very fortunate to have one here in the UK, and we want to maintain that line and its importance, particularly on this topic of climate change as well. Back the best of British storytelling, so telling those stories which we're brilliant at, storytelling, and surfacing those hopeful, positive stories about our new future, what we can do about it, and the impact of climate change on all of our lives, yeah? And bringing people together. These are the 3 priorities for the BBC. And then we also have, additional to that, we have an organisational strategy and commitment to net zero and nature positive by 2050 as well. So we love Bristol. We do a lot of work here. It's a huge community for us. It's very important to the BBC, and we're fully committed to it. So, you know, I really want to sort of foster that engagement with us, particularly on this topic around nature. Not just the role of the NHU, but all of the independent production companies that we work here and the creative community as well that are part of this. It's fundamental to our success and our future on this topic. So moving on to nature positive and what it is, it's sort of spawned out of a concept that has come up really in sort of corporate language. It also did, I went to Montreal, I did go to the COP15 that was delayed many times, that ended up happening in Montreal, which saw the creation of the biodiversity framework, is this concept of nature positivity and how can we, you know, get organisations, businesses in particular, committed to a future where they're halting and restoring the problem that we're in and actually making a positive contribution. And that's essentially what this topic is about, and how we think about it at the BBC. It's about giving more back to the planet than we are currently taking out of it as an organisation. So we've been off the hook, if you like, for, you know, having externalities as an organisation. Other organisations, all organisations have been off the hook for actually sort of internalising those externalities and having to pay for them. And that is starting to play out quite badly for us, because we're clearly in an ecological overshoot situation, and that is also connected to why we have a climate problem as well. So nature positivity is about bringing that into sight and understanding it, measuring it, being scientifically rigorous about it, having credibility in that position about what our impact is as an organisation, measuring it, and then going beyond that to actually say, right, let's go up beyond a nature neutral position to actually a nature positive position. And what would that look like? What would we need to do to get the BBC into a credible position that we could stand behind and we could actually prove it as well? So arguably, some people say, well, look, the BBC is brilliant. I mean, its programming speaks for itself. Think of the impact of David Attenborough, for example, and all of our output on the topic. So, you know, people have said to me, arguably, we are already nature positive because of the impact we have through our programming. But we're not looking to cheat the system here, yeah, because the impact of our programming is quite intangible at times to measure. We are measuring it. We've been doing some brilliant impact work. But we want to be scientific about it as an organisation and the impact we have, and also drive others to do the same. Because I'm very much of the belief, if everybody did this, it would be brilliant. And we could actually halt and restore nature and actually get to a really good position, not just here in the UK, but globally. If everybody took responsibility and internalised their externalities and the impact that they have, particularly on biodiversity, then we could actually sort this situation out quite quickly. And that's why we think it's important. Now, why does this matter to the BBC? I think it's fairly obvious in terms of, we've got this guy that lives in Richmond, has had quite a big impact on the BBC and is world-renowned, and we are world-renowned for our wildlife programming. We do test our audiences on this as well, in terms of, where do you get your information on the environment, what is a trusted source, and we still come up as number one. Yeah, so it's still very relevant to who we are as an organisation and our content. And we've got other, we've got Springwatch, we've got Wild Owls here that was created by Silverback. We've got obviously the NHU content as well. And it's also our news and our science and environment output as well. So we actually have signed up to something called a climate content pledge, which we created in effect and brought industry with us at COP26. And that requires us to integrate the latest climate science across all of our content, all genres, dramas, children's programs. All programs EastEnders need to integrate the latest climate science. It's not just limited to the environmental content and the NHU. We've also subsequently created a journalism climate commitment, which we've launched with the European Broadcasting Unit as well. So we're dead serious about doing this, and we're fully committed to getting all our staff across this as well, which is why we do a lot of training and engagement with all of our staff. We have mandatory training on the topic to deliver this, and we'll probably get into that in the conversation about how we deliver it. So moving on from the sort of like, what is nature positive? Why does it matter to the BBC? Because of our reputation and our brand, which is at risk if we don't get this right. We can't say we don't know about the topic and we don't know the crisis that we're in. This is how we do it. Yeah, and as I said, if all organisations did this, we'd be in a much better place. Yeah, if we were legislated and required to do this, we'd be in a much better place than we currently are. So you need to focus on deep decarbonisation first. You can't get away from it. You can't offset your way out of it. You absolutely need to commit to it, and ideally have science-based targets in place, which has a system that sits behind it that dictates how you measure your carbon and how you're going to decarbonise. You need to measure your impacts that are wider than carbon. You can't just focus on carbon and have a carbon tunnel lens on this. You need to also focus on your land impacts, your water impacts, your resource impacts, your impact on smog formation, eutrophication. It's all part of a system that we utilise, something called life cycle assessment. So again, we're applying real science to this to figure out and measure what our impacts are, and I'll come on to that. We need to adapt a halt and restore strategy as an organisation. We need to be aware of the impact that we're having, and we need to mitigate it as much as we can. We don't want to cheat our way out of it and compensate. We need to figure out what is going on, what damage we're creating, and how we can halt that damage as much as possible, and also make investments in nature to play that restorative role and regenerate nature as well. So, eliminating emissions, as I said, halving them by 2030, halving them again by 2040, and ideally bringing them down to zero by 2050. Measuring our biodiversity footprint, and we've actually lent into Oxford University to do that, and I've got a slide on the results on that. And you also need to start getting into the site level or localised impacts that you have on nature. It's not good enough just to have a global BBC view on this and ladder up all the data sets to say this is the carbon equivalent for the BBC. You need to get local about it, and you need to get specific about where the damage is actually happening. And then again, this halt and restore strategy as well. So first off, determine your mitigation strategies before you get into any investments in compensation, and then set targets behind it as well that extend you away from just thinking about this and from a carbon perspective. So I'm really locked into this idea of 30 by 30. I've read a lot, I think about it, I meet people. If we could get to a position that we had 30% of the globe conserved or protected by 2030, we could start to arrest the ecological overshoot situation that we're in. It really is a good idea, and as much as you can incorporate that thinking into your target setting is definitely the way to go. So, the results that we found when we measured our biodiversity footprint. As you can see from this circle, and we can answer questions on this when we get into the session if it's useful for people, we adopted a similar approach to the way that we think about this in terms of scopes with our carbon. Yeah, so we've got direct operational emissions, as we call them, scope 1 and 2. And then you have the wider impact that you have, which is everything else, particularly your supply chain, which is your scope 3. And as you can see, most of the noise is happening in the scope 3. It's no surprise, it's the wider impact that you have. And it's the same for carbon, and it's the same for biodiversity as well. So you really need to start to focus on the hotspots or the areas that you have a problem with. And the supply chain just comes up straight away in terms of who we buy from, what the provenance of those products are, where they're coming from, and which part of the world, where they're manufactured, etc. And that starts to focus in on land use issues and trying to eliminate deforestation risk in your supply chain. System that we used is called life cycle assessment. I do have a background in it, so I'm a bit partial to this approach, but it does work, and it is also recommended by some of the frameworks that you adopt this approach. And then there's libraries of what we call emissions factors that calculate not just the carbon part of it, but also the extended other impact categories that pick up our impact on land, water, resource use, etc. So this is about determining and calculating what we call our embodied biodiversity impact. Yeah, so not just the impact that we have at a site level day to day, perhaps, with our green spaces, but going behind that and really understanding from our production activity and from the materials that we use and that we buy globally, what is the impact on extraction and impact on biodiversity. So biodiversity in this context is the sort of diversity of species that we might be having an impact on in terms of having species risk as a result of the operations of the BBC. Abundance is also an issue as well for the biodiversity system, which is what we're trying to calculate, what impact we're having on the breadth of species, the variety of species, but also on the abundance of those species as well. So staff engagement is very key to this, by the way, in terms of getting people to understand that they can't just talk about carbon and carbon emissions. But most staff now are quite well versed in carbon, actually, which has been a big change over the last 3 years. When we first started this journey around talking about net zero, scope 1 and 2, scope 3, science-based targets, it was just all jargon to people, and it was quite disengaging in a creative community, as you can imagine. It's a bit of a turn-off. But now people are quite well versed in that, and they understand it. So what we're trying to do now is bring nature and biodiversity into that conversation as well. So we went early on something called TNFD, which is the Task Force for Nature Financial Disclosures. And we piloted it. We got in the room. It was part of the reason why I went over to Montreal as well, to meet the people that are actually designing that framework. This framework will be coming into UK regulation, so the BBC has to get a match fit for it. We're going to be regulated on it. They're going to be saying to us, what's your impact on biodiversity? Have you measured it? What are you doing about it? Are you mitigating against it? You're now going to have to report and disclose against it. And if you don't, we're going to fine you. That's what's going to happen in the next 12 to 18 months. Good news. I don't mind that. Let's bring it on. Regulation helps everybody get on the right side with this topic. So this is what we've done, and we actually looked at all of our sites. So we've got, amazingly, 225 sites at the BBC, and we're a global organisation that operates, across more than 79 countries. And as a result of that, we wanted to understand the local impact and compare them, where those sites sit in terms of their proximity to what we call biomes, so the sort of natural areas and ecosystems that they directly impact or sit near to. We went through that exercise as part of this process. This is what TNFD does. It just brings that awareness to your operations and makes them very material to your business. Very useful exercise. And they apply something called the LEAP system, which requires you to locate your impact, evaluate that impact, assess that impact, and then prepare what you're going to do about it. And that's part of the process about mapping all your different sites. The next step is to really understand, where are we filming in the world? Where are our data centres? Where do they sit? What impact are they having on the natural environment? The other thing that we're doing is we're looking at our actual sites themselves. So we started this working with Arup, and we're doing what we call biodiversity baselining, essentially. So we're looking at all the different green spaces that we have across the UK, 4 sites we've picked initially, to say, what can we do with those sites? What opportunities do we have to restore them? What can we activate in terms of a biodiversity net gain plan against those sites? What kind of investments? And again, that 30 by 30 kind of rule comes into play a bit, because you haven't got much space to work with. You know, are we going to reduce our car parks by 30%, for example, and make way for green spaces? How are we going to activate our green roofs? How are we going to activate local green teams to help us with this process? Everybody wants to get involved in it, by the way, and we never have a problem with people saying, oh, it's too boring, I don't want to get involved. Everybody wants to get involved. We're also setting targets, as I said. So we've got carbon targets, and we've been very good on those. We've got what we call science-based targets, which is sort of like the gold standard of how you tackle net zero and decarbonisation. We're also, at the moment, looking at land targets to build out from that carbon position. And again, we're looking at science-based targets to do that. And in particular, land reduction footprint. So reducing, if you reduce the space, the office space in particular, but the space that office sits on, you reduce that land footprint, you will reduce your impact. Yeah. The next one is going hard after the conversion of ecosystems, so making sure that when we operate and buy things, that we're not creating a problem somewhere else in the world through deforestation as a result of our operations. So no conversion of ecosystems as a result of our business. And then the third one is about engaging landscapes, making investments into landscape engagement, which does require money. Yeah, so that's the problem. It does require investment to make that happen. Our carbon targets, they're up here. We're actually just awaiting what we call our long-term targets from the Science Based Target Initiative. And once we get those approved, then we've got a true position and alignment to what we call the net zero standard. So we're going to only be able to claim that we're net zero as an organisation once we've decarbonised the organisation by 90% across all scopes. Yeah. So we're not going to try and cheat the system, and we're not going to be reliant on offsetting to do that. We're putting all of our energy, money and resources into getting rid of the emissions at source and permanently. And we believe that that is going to stand the test of time and be the most credible position that the BBC can take. We're doing pretty well. On our scope 1 and 2, we've been running now for 3 years. We've got a target of minus 46% science-based target, and we're currently at minus 21%. I've still got Deloitte in the room giving me my assurance statement on this, by the way. It's coming into getting a little bit of a preview on the annual report. But we're doing pretty well. The scope 3 is still going up, and that we largely think that is because of the way we calculate our emissions, because they're largely estimated. But we think they've peaked and they're starting to come down. So we can see success in sight, and we're going to win the game on this. And, you know, luckily we have the support of the executive and the board on delivering against these targets. It matters. People are going to be judged on it. And in 2 years' time, there's going to be full transparency on data for every organisation, I'm told. So there's nowhere to hide. So we have to deliver against this. Investment in nature, it's the tricky one at the moment. What does it cost? I get asked by the exco all the time. Great, love it, want to do it, nature positive, totally fits with who we are as an organisation. Let's do the right thing here. What's the value? What's the money that's required to do this? And the good news is that whilst we're a big organisation, big global organisation, we're not an extraction company, we're not a mining company, we're not an oil and gas company, we're not a FMCG company, we're not a Nestle, Unilever. Our impact on biodiversity is not actually that huge. So the investment isn't that big actually for an organisation like the BBC. But we have to do it in a very credible way, and we're working through that at the moment. We haven't got that nailed yet. We're actually working with an organisation called Finance Earth. And there is a sweet spot that you can find, because if you don't make the investments, we run the risk of the projects that we want to invest in the future to get this right when it is regulated, costing a lot more money. So there is a clear case for them going early now with reputable project developers here in the UK, and they do exist. I actually know quite a few of them. And we've been looking at some projects that could deliver this for us. And this is an example of a project that I've been to a couple of times. It's in the High Fens. It's essentially reinstating a wetland in the High Fen area. So there's a lot of peat on this particular site, and it's restoring peat. It's locking that peat down, creating the wetland again that used to exist on that land, reintroducing biodiversity. There's a real vision around this. It's basically the team involved in this, by the way, is the Nattergal team, which is it's the NEP team. I'm very close to this team and understand what they do. I'm not trying to make a pitch for them. I'm just saying I'm close to this and I know they're doing it properly. And this is about ensuring that that peat is locked in, and we're actually going to create new peat as a result of that, by creating wetlands and grasslands again and reinstating this area into what it should be doing rather than farmland. And as a result of that, we'll get the biodiversity net gain, but it will also help us out with sequestering carbon for that 10% residual emissions where we have a problem in 2050 to meet net zero. So there's a clear way of doing this, and very exciting, you know, to see some of the species coming back in. I don't know if some of you are familiar with the NEP story, but lapwings, reintroducing water buffalo is the vision here, red deer, some ponies as well, to try and create a dense, species-rich grassland on this particular site. This is what nature restoration looks like. This is best practice. And this is something that the BBC would love to get involved in if we get permission with the investments that are required. So I'll summarise, because I do want to have a conversation. What do organisations need to do? They need to focus on deep decarbonisation first. There's no way out of it. There's no cheat the system way. It has to be getting rid of the emissions at source and permanently. Measure your impacts wider than carbon. So undertake that biodiversity footprinting that we've undertaken. And lastly, to adopt a halt and restore nature strategy by setting targets. So I'm looking forward to having some questions and having a bit of a chat about this. And there's no no-go areas, by the way, so please feel free to put your hand up and get involved. Thanks very much.
Microphone okay up at the back? Okay, yep, thank you, great. Okay, thanks very much, Danielle, for giving us a window into the BBC's thinking and commitment to sustainability. And what hopefully we'll do over the next half an hour is just to perhaps try and delve a bit behind the scenes to understand some of the things that might not be in the sustainability report, for example, and to understand your personal position. So I guess one place to start is to understand where sustainability sits within the BBC. So you lead a sustainability unit, but where does that sit in governance terms within the BBC? What's the level of influence that you and your unit have in terms of the governance and strategic operations of the organisation? Yeah,
no problem. I think prior to me arriving, it bounced around a little bit, I think, but now we sit in finance. My boss is the CFO. Luckily, you know, we get on well. It's always good to, you know, to be friendly with the money guy. So yeah, Alan Dixon sits on the Exco, and then I also get a lot of exposure to a lady called Lee Tavaziva and Tim Davey as well, actually, who both sit on the board. So, yeah, we do have a governance structure in place. We have a team. We're a small unit, perfectly formed, I think, with a team of technicians. We have got people that have got program making expertise in the team as well, and a little bit of comms and marketing. But particularly a team of what I call the Net Zero Ninjas and sustainability expertise, because it's a technical topic. There's no avoiding it. It's technical. I think it often surprises people.
And I mean, UWE, where I'm based, we are a large organisation as well, and one of the things that we've been working to do is to take a position of strong centralised leadership and devolve it across the organisation. So how is that playing out in the BBC? Where else does responsibility for sustainability lie outside of your unit?
Yeah, we're actually just starting to shift it out. We're trying to make it business as usual. It can't just sit in the team. We've got about 22,000 people globally, and it's very federated as well, the BBC. So just to have it sitting in, you know, my team of like, I think 13 full-time employees, it's just not going to work. I'm not going to be able to deliver it. So we're now making some hires now, putting in place. We're putting in at the moment we're hiring a sustainability lead to go into finance to help us out with some of the reporting and disclosures, which are cranking up and becoming quite serious. We've got program managers or sustainability leads now that's sitting out in the divisions. We've got a team in studios, technical expertise as well in studios. We've got technical expertise in technology, in content. as well. So the model is that we're going to shift this out into the business and get them to own it, in effect. And that could, we have to be agile on this. It could mean changes to my team in the future as well, because we've been in setup mode, getting our house in order. But yeah, now we're starting to push it out across the BBC.
And in terms of the BBC's sort of motivations and what it's responding to, you hinted at regulation, certainly imminent regulation and some level of existing regulation, but what are the other key drivers that make the BBC want to be the best they can be in terms of sustainability?
Yeah, I think it's about being a responsible business. That definitely comes into it. There's a commercial element to it as well. Sky went very early on net zero. I mean, that's great, good for Sky. The one thing I do when I have time with Tim is if I'm not winning a particular argument, I do say, well, Sky have done it.
Just for the audiences, for the audience who are not maybe in the media industry, Tim Davey is the Director General of the BBC, and so he's the boss cat. And yeah, and it's like a button you can press, and it really gets him. So he says, well, Sky have done it. He goes, Sky have done it. Sky have done it. So I think he was under pressure to follow Sky and to say net zero by 2030 is what got said before I arrived in the job, actually. And so there's definitely a bit of that commercialisation, the commercial opportunity. This is an opportunity. It's not just a risk. It's something that you've got to manage. It's annoying. You've got to grasp it and say it's an opportunity as a business. And if you don't go after it and have a clear position on it, then you're potentially going to look like a laggard. And we've actually done the numbers on this, by the way, with EY. What will the financial impact be on the BBC if we get this wrong, if we don't do it, if a brand is impacted by it, on nature and on climate? And they're big numbers. I often show that number as well, because it's a really big number, and it's a lot bigger than me and my team. So that's the other tactic that you can use on this. It's a key driver. Audiences care about it. We have to surface our audiences. That's absolutely the primary goal and purpose of the BBC, and this is in the public interest. There's no debate anywhere now, particularly here in the UK, about whether this is happening. So we haven't got an impartiality issue in that respect. It's how you deliver it is the debate, right? How do you deliver, net zero in a just fair transition way is the debate that we're seeing play out in the politics at the moment. But you rarely hear anybody take the position of, well, climate change isn't real anymore. Not here in the UK, and it is written into UK law. We have a Climate Change Act. So yes, we have to tell people what's coming. That's part of our purpose in terms of informing and educating on the topic. So yeah. I mean, there are a few different ways we could go from that point, but just to pick up a bit on the target. So the BBC target is 2050 rather than 2030, which is recognised as being the gold standard. So why is the BBC working towards a 2050 rather than a 2030 target? Yeah,
but there will be an update, a press release to confirm and clarify this. So when Tim did announce we're going to be net zero by 2030, and then I came in the room and went, wait, hold on a minute. Let's just be careful about the term net, how much of it is net zero, which is why we've adopted science-based targets. And subsequent to that announcement being made, something called the Net Zero Standard came out, which basically requires us to decarbonise by 90%. Yeah, that's going to take a bit of time. And we feel that 2050 is a credible date, it's a credible position, and we're focused on, we're not going to cheat it and net it out. We're going to actually do the hard work of getting rid of the emissions. So that will be announced. We're just waiting at the moment on the approval of those 90% targets. And then we'll put a statement out to clarify that our position is 2050. And the reasons why is because we've actually upgraded it to be true net zero, what we call true net zero.
I mean, in terms of the progress that's been made so far, how has that been achieved? You've talked about reducing emissions at source.
Yeah.
What has the BBC had to stop doing, or where have there been the big impact items? The big gains so far, and what are the next areas that are going to have to be, the steps that are going to have to be taken to get to that 46% by 2030?
Yeah, we've got it all in sight in terms of, go away, develop the business case for this. Again, people really anxious about the numbers, about how much it's going to cost the BBC. Whether we like it or not, we have to deliver it anyway. But it was like there was anxiety around the business case for it. So I have shared these numbers in the public domain before. So we calculated that all the initiatives, when you stack them up, particularly for our scope 1 and 2, what we call our direct operational emissions. So that's the fuel that we purchase and burn at the BBC. That's diesel, gas, petrol, but also our electricity as well, all bundled into that. That's what your scope 1 and 2 is. It's your fossil fuels, basically, that you're purchasing on behalf. It's direct. The initiatives to get rid of that, to halve it, to minus 46% to be exact, is an investment of about £36 million by 2030. But by doing that and taking that approach, it delivers over £55 million worth of savings. Yeah, and the reason for that is because gas is expensive, and actually we can purchase electricity quite cheaply at the BBC, and so there are real serious gains to be made if you decarbonise and you degasify as quickly as possible. We're also trying to eliminate diesel from our productions. Also has a corresponding impact, benefit, if you like, on nature, air pollution impact of diesel, the extraction of fossil fuels again being negative for nature and the environment. So you're starting to couple these things together as well, of benefit. To reach that minus 46% is totally within sight, or actually ahead of target on that. There is a bit of a capex investment to put in heat pumps. We've just put a heat pump up in Glasgow, and there's plans to put heat pumps in our bigger offices as well. We have a plan to switch our fleet to an EV fleet as well. We are also trying to reduce our footprint, exiting older buildings. When we lease a new building, we go into a new building, we're asking a higher specification. A lot of our landlords have this problem too. The Avivas of the world, for example, they're also trying to achieve net zero, so they help you out. And this is how you achieve it. It's really largely about the operation of your buildings and the fuel that you're using. Yeah, that's what we're going hard after.
So moving on to the nature positive part of the strategy, this was a pre-submitted question from an audience member. So what does nature positive actually mean? A lot of the impacts on nature and ecosystems are they're taking place in one part of the world, and some of the initiatives to replace them are elsewhere. So it's not replacing like for like. So what's the BBC's interpretation of nature positive in that sense?
Yeah, no, look, it's fair. Our interpretation of it is similar to the approach that we're taking with carbon, is let's not cheat the system here. Let's get really exact about where the impacts are happening. We're still really working on that. So we've got a clear sight of what our biodiversity footprint is. We've done it 2 or 3 times now, actually. We've iterated with better data. The good news is it's the same data sets as the net zero data sets that we're pushing through the system. We're just using an extended impact library, essentially, to capture the totality of biodiversity. As I said, Oxford University helped us with this, so we know it's a credible approach, and it's recommended, again, by that framework, TNFD. So what we're trying to do now is get under the bonnet of those global data sets to sort of say, okay, so when we buy materials, when we buy wood for sets, for example, if we buy merchandise, and it's, we've got cotton T-shirts, or we've got, cups and mugs and vinyl and different products that we license through our merchandise, where does it come from, and where is it being manufactured? And that level down is tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 is what's going to enable us to actually mitigate the impacts, because then we can change some of our sourcing decisions, make some calls, and have a material strategy about where we source this stuff and where it's manufactured. That's where we're up to. Again, we're not trying to cheat it and compensate in different parts of the world. We're just in the process of really understanding what that impact is and where it sits.
So your biodiversity analysis, I guess this is partly a question about prioritisation. So I think it was about 25% of that wheel impact came from the use of goods that are produced and sold by the BBC. So I guess the commercial arm of the organisation.
Yeah.
So that tension between funding and need for commercialisation, I mean, there'd be one argument to say if you just cut that arm off, then that 25% disappears like that. Yeah. So how does that prioritisation play out in the boardroom of the BBC? Yeah,
look, I mean, it's very real, because so the Studios has got a big growth plan, ambition, because plan for the BBC, I don't think there's any secret about this, is that the public service purse, there's modelling discussions going on about our charter, the renewal of that charter. Is it sustainable? Which parts of the BBC should retain that sort of public service element of it, and what should we commercialise? And we've been pushed quite hard actually to commercialise as much as we can, and luckily our content's pretty well leading, so we can sell it internationally as well. There's a real tension with growth and low carbon or low impact growth, and how we do that. And we think we can do it. We've been doing a lot of modelling in this area. So the big areas the problem areas for us are the merchandise, but also investments as well, where we make investments, and we just need to push very hard on other areas where we can get some serious reductions, which is through controlling our supply chain. But there is a tension there. I'm not going to deny it. That's part of the problem where we've got a bit of growth going on in our Scope 3 at the moment, is because BBC Studios is growing. So we need to enable them to grow, but when they grow, it's low carbon growth, it's low impact growth.
So I guess on extending that then to the fact that these activities will continue. So how is the university? How is the BBC working with suppliers and other partners? You've mentioned a couple of initiatives earlier about the journalism-specific activities or content creation. But what else? Are there other initiatives or particular criteria that the BBC apply to suppliers, or is that an area for more activity?
No, we're quite on it with the suppliers. There's loads to do. So we ran a symposium event last November, and we asked our key suppliers to come, and they all came. We were quite shocked actually how many came, and they all want to come again. And what they're telling us is they're kind of like, what do you want from us? Just be clear on what the ask is. The problem is with the SMEs, right? Because they haven't got the resources or the skills or the investment to upskill to sort of a bigger one that's doing it anyway. So some of our suppliers, you can imagine who we've got on our books, the like of Amazon, like of Atos or KPMG, they're all doing this in the same way that I'm doing it. They're all locked into a science-based target system. So they're not a problem. In some ways it's just about, right, let's get the data exchange and that handshake right. It's trying to bring everybody with us on this journey as well, and we can achieve it by collaborating, not just with suppliers, but we do this across industry. So we're not trying to make it a BBC thing or a BBC ask. We're making it a BBC ITV Sky Channel 4 ask. How do we eliminate diesel, for example, from our productions? Can we make it mandatory that everybody has to eliminate diesel generators from 2025, for example? Is that feasible? Is the market ready for us? Can we switch to HVO today? What would that look like? What's the battery technology looking like? And we work together on all these things, and that's how we're going to do it. Is not just doing it independently, but it's really is collaborating. And we find on this topic that we're not competing anymore. So Sky had the early lead on it, and I think they were enjoying that glow of like Sky Zero and that button that I kept pressing with Tim. But we're now working together on it because we have to. And it benefits all of us to have the same ask of our suppliers, because we share the same suppliers, and bring them with us and make that investment together with them. So yeah, it's a very active area actually. We just made another hire in procurement actually to focus particularly on this, to enable us to make our procurement sustainable.
And then final question before we open up to the floor, just perhaps more about your personal leadership as a sustainability leader. How do you feel? What are the key bits of advice to people that some in the audience, be they students or people working in the sustainability space? Any kind of leadership approaches that you found to be particularly successful, not just in the BBC, but in some of your previous sustainability roles in very large organisations and initiatives?
Yeah, no, look, I mean, I think you just got to maintain a sense of humour and not take it too serious. It's a serious topic. But you've got to try and maintain a sense of humour and enjoy the ride, really, is what I would say, because it's come a long way. I've been doing this nearly 20 years. When I first started, I remember telling, my husband said, will you go back to work? I had the kids, and I was like, well, he said, pretty much, please will you go back to work? And I was like, yeah. And we were living in Australia at the time. And I said, well, the only thing I want to do is save the planet. And he goes, oh, great. So I did. I went back to uni, I went back to night school and did environmental science. And friends of mine were like, well, that's not really going to help John out. And this has ended up being, a hell of a journey. And my daughter's now studying ecology and economics at York, so proud. So it's a really great future once you get into it, but you've got to be quite resilient. There's
Brilliant.
definitely some knocks along the way.
Thank you. Well, we've got time to open out to questions. There are a couple of roving microphones, so we'll try and get round as many as we can. This gentleman in the vest in the middle shot his hand up first.
Yeah, thank you very much. I was a little surprised the way that it went, because as you pointed out, actually your footprint on biodiversity and carbon is not that big in the grander scheme of things.
No.
What you're really, really good at is influencing people, inspiring people, educating people, and driving that change through your audience. And I wondered if you were measuring that, if you were seeing how you could impact on not just what you did, but what the millions of people who listen to you do.
Yeah, no, we're really trying in that space. So we have, the 3 pillars, we go back to that. We have net zero, nature positive, and then the people positive pillar. So that's the focus of the people positive pillar. So we have a dashboard of what we're going to measure, our KPIs, if you like. And in that pillar, we've got how our audience reach on this topic. Because we survey, every 6 months, we do a survey on climate with our audiences. We're very lucky at the BBC because we have a pretty big grab of the UK population. If you look at our monthly stats, so they're quite true, the responses that we get, of all ages, and it's segmented, by the way, in terms of age groups, socio-economic as well. We have a brilliant audience monitoring team. I realised today, actually, because I was hanging out a bit with ITV and others, that they really envy our audience monitoring team in this topic, because it gives us a lot of insight. So it's about reaching people. We can track that. How do we reach more people? How do we reach those hard-to-reach audiences, such as the younger audiences are a problem for us right now. And we lose them to TikTok at about age 9, and then they come back to us. They tend to really enjoy CBBS and watch all the the kids programs with mum and dad, and then then we lose them. And we got to try and get them back and have that stickiness to the BBC and make it relevant for them. So we also track informing and educating, which is part of our mission at the BBC. We do that in terms of people's relative perception of what their knowledge is, but also their actual knowledge on the topic as well. So, do you feel informed as a result of watching this programme? Do you feel that you understand net zero or the environmental climate crisis, etc.? And then we actually test them on a few questions to see whether they actually do understand some of these concepts as well. So we've got the sort of perceived knowledge versus the actual kind of knowledge base. It's quite interesting on the gender balance on that, by the way. A lot of men back themselves on that. Yeah, I got this. So it's fascinating. So we do that in terms of who we reach, how we're informing and educating on the topic. Also the number of programmers that we've got as well, because we've got a digital platform now through iPlayer, so we can track the volume of environmental content that we're putting out on our platform, and whether that's increasing as well. Nature connectivity, we're actually tracking that at the moment in terms of how connected people feel with nature, what their response is in our surveys, and whether we can increase that. And then to supplement this, so these are the surveys, the pulse surveys that we're running every 6 months with a set of questions. Sometimes we add to it, but we try and keep it stabilised so we can actually track the trends. We ran some impact analysis. So I've done impact analysis before in previous life, using regression analysis and maths to determine what the impact is of somebody watching Green Planet. And we ran it against wild owls as well. I'm probably going to run it again. We've got another wild owls coming out. Good news, guys. And we want to understand the impact of the BBC on our partnership relationships as well. So that onward journey that people have, the inciting moment that the BBC creates and is so brilliant at, but that onward journey that they have with the National Trust, for example, and how it benefits the National Trust. So we ran surveys to do that again, the sort of before you watch Green Planet, the after you watch Green Planet, the responses that people make in terms of their understanding on plants in that particular series, but also their responses to does it make you go to the park, does it make you go outside, does it change your consumer behaviours as well. And by using regression analysis, you can figure out what they call the difference in difference and see whether it actually can be attributed to that program as well. And it can be. And we also, from that, can calculate our other things like GVA, which is gross value added contribution to the Bristol economy, to the UK, wider UK economy. But to do it at scale is expensive. It's an expensive exercise. So we're trying to figure out how do we make this an industry-wide impact framework that we all use, that we all invest in, and then it's not just a BBC impact framework that we can say, oh, look at the impact we've had, you know, that we're all using the same system in effect. And that's underway, actually, with quite a few partners. So, yeah, it really does matter to us.
Yeah, the chap just there.
Yeah, thanks very much. Really impressive, and very glad to hear you're not super good at cheating by offsetting things, and you're trying to make real change. But there's such a range of BBC content, so many different types of programming, and sort of impacts that you have. Which ones might change? Would there be any that you wouldn't make any more, or is there any that the audience would start noticing it's different? And
Yeah.
would they mind?
No, it's it's interesting because, you know, I think some of the creative community sort of live in fear of, you know, not having that license to operate and do what they want, in effect. And we do seem to sort of dance a little bit around the commissioners, you know what I mean, in terms of sort of, got to give them the, you know, you can't get in their swim lane, tell them what to do, what content to create. But I think we can achieve the minus 46%, we can halve the emissions. We've done quite a few case studies and been running it against particular series as well. Can we achieve that target without interfering with the creativity and how, you know, the creative integrity of that particular program, make difficult choices on where it's filmed, for example, that could impact the output? Yeah, can we achieve that? And we think we can. So we think we're in a good place till 2030. It's just getting down to that 90%, and then we're going to have to be definitely in carbon budget world, where you're going to have to say to content teams, you've got a budget, stick to it. You might be able to blow the budget on one particular program, but you're going to have to make some changes to these other programs as well. And there's other things coming in, like generative AI, maybe that. I mean, like AI is a big energy burn, by the way. I'm a bit worried about it. And I heard from Mark Carney this week, actually, because I went to a brilliant presentation by him. And I think for Google, Facebook, and Meta, you know, the big guns, Amazon, they're generating the equivalent of Sweden additional power consumption at the moment, every year at the moment, to service this AI computing power that we're creating. But some of it might be able to help us out in terms of how we operate in the hybrid. And we've already put in place, thanks to COVID, a lot of hybrid models in terms of how we generate content, and we don't fly teams out. There's a brilliant initiative at the NHU called Songbird, which is about a £1 million investment into local camera teams, rather than flying everybody out all the time. So some of these changes are already happening. I feel comfortable with what we can do by 2030, but I think then it's going to get difficult.
I'm going to struggle to get around all of the questions, especially since every time I look up, there's more hands have shot up. Yes, thank you. Thanks, Julia.
Thank you so much. Catherine Piper from Futurely. Thank you so much, Danielle. I want to talk Attenborough because we put on weekly events around sustainability topics, and nearly every week I'm quoting Attenborough because he's such a trusted source and very authentic in his communication. And I'm quite interested to understand, obviously he's doing an amazing job in what he does now in communicating the climate and ecological emergency, but he's not going to be here forever communicating that. And have you got plans in place for his legacy and what comes after Attenborough? I know that sounds a bit morbid.
No, I know. Look, we do. You know, and I think he's 98 now, isn't he? You know, and it's incredible. He actually walked through the London office the other day, and you know, he's in good shape.
Yeah.
98. It's phenomenal. So I didn't show the clip actually, partly because of time, and I thought we were going to have this conversation, but you may have seen we've got a Voice for Nature campaign. So I don't think we're going to have a clear winner as to who's going to pass the baton on to, because there's quite a few presenters that are doing a brilliant job out there that are going to sort of, you know, fulfil some of his legacy. He's a tough man to match, isn't he? It's tough. It's that voice.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You hear it, and it just makes you, you just feel so proud of it. So we've got a campaign running at the moment called Voice for Nature. And what we're trying to do is activate everybody. You, me, everybody in this room can be a voice for nature. It doesn't need to be David, and disassociate it being owned by David and the BBC, that we can all play our part in doing that. And which is why we had Planet Earth 3, which is the clip, around using kids' voices and changing it up. And I met, we've got a guy actually who's a rapper who's actually on our advisory board. It's called Louis VI. He was on Spring Watch recently. He's worth a watch. He came up with this idea about, he's like, I like David, but it'd be really good to have young, like my voice doing the talk over on Green Planet, for example, different voices. So that's the direction of travel at the moment.
I guess it's an opportunity, isn't it? To really, and I hope he would be in agreement with this, that actually he's got such an influence that actually when he decides to step back, can we not celebrate that and really push change? Yeah,
I think that.
Really
well, we did actually ask him on this campaign, the Voice for Nature. We got his permission. He promoted it as well, actually. So there, if you look on, you can find clips about him promoting this Voice for Nature, and it was with his permission, and he thought it was a great idea.
We've got one final question. Try and take one from the back there.
So Charlie Dixon, Head of Market Engagement in the UK for the TNFD. Very glad to have BBC as a TNFD early adopter. I wanted to talk to you, well, first of all to say, absolutely thrilled to hear that the sustainability unit within BBC sits within finance. That's a huge deal and just speaks volumes to how seriously BBC takes sustainability. I wanted to double down on the business case conversation that you had earlier. So you were talking about how important that was in getting this across the line and getting everyone in the organisation essentially speaking from the same hymn book. Business case super clear on carbon. You just have your numbers from EY. The savings are essentially going to outweigh the investments that you have by 2030 or a little bit beyond that. It makes total financial sense. How does it apply to nature? Do you have the numbers there, or is there a different route that you went down? Because you also can't play the sky button with Tim for that one, so I'm assuming there might be a different route.
Yeah, no, look, it's still in play. We're trying to work it out. I have got a site. I'm not going to disclose them today, if that's okay, but I have got a site of, a range. What's the top end of this in terms of making investments. So the approach that we're taking is measuring our biodiversity, which we've done, mitigating it. So we've done that. We've run workshops across the BBC with content teams, production teams, and operational teams to say what can we do to actually reduce that impact, to mitigate it, before we get into conversation of, what's the difference, what's the gap, what's left, what's residual or what's left over. Then we've got our sites themselves, so doing the uplift on the actual green sites. We have more than we think in terms of the biodiversity net gain action plans that we can activate. So that gets you to a position. So what's left over? And it's not huge. I think for some organisations it would almost be a rounding error when you actually look at it. It's interesting. But I still have to make that case, and that's the exam question I'm being asked at the moment. We're up for it, get it, need to do it, what's the number? Interestingly, our commercial arm's really keen to do this because this is a good look. And actually when you start getting into the, what's it going to cost, I think the benefit to the commercial arm of doing this and having a credible position on nature in particular outweighs the cost. So it is harder though to sell, because the NPV, the net present value, and the business case for scope 1 and 2 was clear as day. That process went into the Excel, sell through it. Yeah, you got the money. It's clear. If we make, what's annoying about it for everybody for the carbon problem is it typically does require a bit of upfront investment. But once you've made that upfront investment, your OPEX goes down. You start saving money. It's not quite like that with nature. Yeah, we have to make an investment. But if we don't do it now, it's going to go up. There's only so much land. Here in the UK, we have to buy in the UK because we're a UK-based business. So it wouldn't be credible to be doing it, to a point that was made earlier, somewhere over there saying it's fine. You know, we're making investments in a faraway place in Indonesia, for example, and that makes us credible. We have to make some investments here because that's where most of our impact is. And there's only so much land, and people are buying it up. I know this because I'm quite close to some of the organisations such as Nattergal. And the big corporates are now buying this land. Pensions funds are getting interested in it as well. And the land will go, and the prices have already gone up in Scotland. So that there is that point as well. If you don't buy now, you're going to end up paying a lot more.
Great. Lots of discussions to keep having. Savita's going to move us into drinks, I think.
Yeah, it feels like we're just getting the conversation started. So before I thank our speaker and our chair, I really want to thank everyone for coming and being part of this evening's conversation and being part of Festival of Nature. And to re-extend the invite, if you have a bit of time and you'd like to join us for a soft drink or a glass of wine, this is a fascinating group. I know we've got students, I see professors of sustainability, people from the BBC unit, I can see at least 2 politicians, we've got someone from TNFD. I'd really invite you to come and not just chat with the people you're with, but to reach out and keep the conversation going. So if you can help me to thank Danielle and Georgina for such great contributions.